Okay, now we're going to do some kind of animation exercise, and I can take requests. If there are no requests, I can just do a basic walk, just to be a bit lazy and not have to think about what I'm going to do. If there are any objections, voice them now. A tango? I don't even know how to dance a tango, man. I can't dance.
Hip-hop. You know hip-hop?
Hip-hop?
Yeah.
You have to model the dance for me, though, so that I can see.
Okay. Model. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to, like, you know, be my reference.
Yeah, I can do a...
Holy shit. That's amazing, man.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's kind of stunning. He's amazing. Mas is like the best dancer I've ever seen. You guys missed out. That was so great that I can't do it. I think I'm going to stick with the walk. That was really an amazing dance, though. Team Cherry knows.
I tried.
Yeah, it was good. We kind of like arcs more when we animate, so we would prefer things to move in a nice rotational way, and you can get much nicer rotational arcs if you're keying rotation to begin with. So if you're rotating the arm over, you get a nice arc. If you translate it like this, you're not getting a super nice arc. I mean, if you do like more than 2 points, then if you have like spline interpolation, it's going to arc a bit, but it's not going to be as nice as the very circular one that you get from just rotating. So that's another reason that you might want to use FK when you're posing the hands freely. It's a little bit of a question of preference. Some animators just like IK better because they have less controls to tweak, and so it's like faster for them and it's easier. But I think they probably end up setting more keyframes in the end to keep the arcs looking nice. In the case of legs, IK is the good default behavior because your feet are going to be for the most time planted on the ground, and you don't really want to have the situation where if you're just keying rotations, it's very hard to like aim it so it gets to the ground perfectly. And of course, once it's gotten there, if you kind of like, you know, move the body, then you want the feet to stay like exactly planted on the ground. And so that's the case with Mancandy. So if you look at the rig, I just showed the FK of the arms. You can see for the feet, there's these little targets at the heel, and I'm just grabbing them with G or with the tweak transformation, and you know, I can show the manipulator if you want, just to make it more visual. So I can just move it, and the whole leg kind of adjusts to where I want it to go. So that's an IK, and once I've placed it, I can take, you know, the body, sorry, and I can move it around, and nothing's going to get out of place. So for instance, for the forearm, I want to always be able to rotate it along this joint because the joint doesn't really move in other ways. So to do that, right next to where it has the manipulator controls on the header for the 3D window, you can click and you can see you have a bunch of other options for the orientations. So you have view, normal, gimbal, and local, as well as global. So to go through these, let me just create another object, let's say a cube, just so we can see local more easily. So here I have a cube, and let me just rotate it around so it's no longer aligned. So you can see that the manipulator right now in global is showing the global orientation, but if I change it to local, it's snapping to the rotation of the cube now. So the manipulator is showing the orientation of the cube rather than the orientation of the world. And so if I want to rotate it, now I can rotate it on its own z-axis, or if I want to move it, I can move it on its own z. Also for scaling, it's quite dramatic, because if I'm scaling it on its own z-axis like that, it's scaling in a kind of a nice way. But if I change back to global, global, and I scale it, oh, it's still doing it in a nice way. Interesting. Okay. So normal is kind of interesting. So it doesn't really change much when you have the object selected. But if I go into edit mode on this mesh, and let's say I select a face, you'll see that I'm getting the z-axis pointing perpendicularly to each face. And so that's moving along its own normal. So for faces, every face has a small vector that's pointing up like this at a 90-degree angle. And so that's called the normal vector for the face. So let's say you want to make something get a little bit bigger on the direction it's already in. That's kind of a very nice axis to have. And for armatures, the normal orientation is used for the orientation of each bone. So if you click on a bone, when you're in normal mode, you get each bone's own orientation. And so this is handy for posing, because I can now like rotate on the arms like z-axis and know that I'm kind of rotating it where the elbow is supposed to rotate. And I'm also going to talk a bit more about transformations in Blender. So this is kind of Blender basic stuff that you need to like move stuff around, but it's important to know it. Is that right now you can see that when I rotate, the pivot is around the bone itself, right? Around the selected bone. And if I select a bunch of parented things and I rotate them all together, it's like only the parent is rotating and the other ones are just moving with it. But let's say I kind of want to have each child individually rotate when I do that, so I can do more of a curve. There's another area here where you can select kind of where the pivots are for the rotation. So by default it's usually on bounding box, I think, but you have a bunch of other options. So for instance, I can select the 3D cursor to be the center pivot point, and then I can rotate around the 3D cursor, wherever it is in space. I can also select individual origins, and when I do individual origins, and I select multiple bones in a chain, and I rotate them, they kind of each have their own rotation, so it's a little bit kind of a smoother, easier way of rotating them all together at the same time. A little bit nicer. So I'm going to leave that on individual origins over here. And you have a helpful icon. So now that we've gone some transformation stuff, let me quickly finish this contact. And I'm not going to do a very nice job. I'm just going to quickly do it. I'm going to make it slightly down, but not by much. And let's just counter a bit. By the way, in this rig, these shapes kind of have a meaning. So the ones that just look like a cone, you can rotate. But the ones with a little square around them, you can move. So I can actually like stretch him around like that if I want to. So let's say that I'm happy with this. I'm going to hit a couple of times. This is a very kind of lazy way of working, but I kind of have this workflow when I animate that I set the key poses, and I kind of key all the controls after I've made the pose. You can key them bone by bone and control by control, and be kind of like, I'm only going to key the things that I actually moved, which is kind of good. But in my case, I kind of like to just know that I've keyed everything. So I just select everything, and I do I, and I do location, rotation, and scale.